So I'm going to give you another example of behaviorism. This is classical conditioning in its truest form. And in the text, you read about little Albert. And so this is actual video of little Albert. And what happened was that little Albert was conditioned to associate animals with a very, very unpleasant sound. And the way they did it was is that, as you're going to see in this video, at first, little Albert didn't seem to mind animals, be it a mouse or a rabbit. Actually seemed kind of curious by it. But then during the conditioning stage, every time a mouse was present, this loud clang noise would occur. And Albert didn't like that noise. And so over time, Albert was conditioned that every time it saw a mouse, it would associate the presence of the mouse with this loud noise that Albert didn't like. And so over time, that mouse becomes a proxy for this loud sound. And so this connection is being conditioned with Albert.
In the early part of the 20th century, psychologists.
If you want to eat healthy and feel your best, you gotta try Kachava. Kachava is the world.
John Watson and Rosalie Rayner set out to teach a baby boy called Little Albert to fear white rats using the principle of classical conditioning. This is a film of their work. The film shows several phases of their study. First, as you see here, the investigators demonstrated that prior to conditioning, Little Albert had no fears of any animals, including, of course, white rats. Watson and Rayner then sought to teach Albert to fear white rats through classical conditioning. In the conditioning phase of the study, which was not filmed, the investigators struck a steel bar with a hammer whenever Albert reached for a rat, making a very loud noise that greatly upset and frightened Albert. After 6 such pairings of the loud noise and the rat, it was believed that the boy had been conditioned to fear white rats. That is, Albert was now expected to react fearfully to white rats whether the rats were paired with loud noises or not. In this next film sequence, we see Albert interacting with a white rat after the conditioning process. The investigators believed that the child's reaction during this trial demonstrated his newly acquired fear of white rats. Finally, the investigators expected that little Albert's conditioned fear of white rats would generalize to stimuli that were similar in key ways to a white rat. In this film segment, they were trying to demonstrate that the child now also reacted fearfully to similar objects, such as a rabbit, a dog, a furry object, and a white mask worn by Watson himself.
For just
So that's an example of classical conditioning. And I think another example, maybe some of you have encountered before, you might have heard of Pavlov, and more specifically Pavlov's dogs. And so Pavlov famously conditioned dogs to associate the sound of a bell with getting fed. And so eventually making this connection between sound of bell, food is going to be presented. Over time, he can get the dogs to start salivating just by sounding the bell. And a similar thing happened here. Also with the sound, although now Albert is associating the sound with something averse, as opposed to the dogs associating the sound of the bell with something pleasurable.